Okay, we are back for the second half of this whole deal, and as is traditional, at the halfway point I kind of go through, comment the code a bit, and kind of describe the whole thing again for anyone who's newly joined us. So what we're trying to achieve today is to be able to place down a bunch of points, and then in order to define like a city, and then have the system kind of fill in these areas for us, and you know, leaving some space between these things for roads, and then kind of drawing buildings procedurally along the sides of these roads so that we end up with something which looks hopefully something like this. This is a really cool tool on Waterbo.h.io which does this. This is kind of what we're trying to replicate, although what we're doing is somewhat simplified. Cool. What's your drink of choice? Yeah, ride that Bulmer curve. Cool. So go into the code here. Copperberg. Okay, a cider, a fruity cider person. Cool. To an existing point to snap to it when drawing. So this kind of defines the city in an abstract sense, right? Like if we look at this thing, this defines like these red points, these red lines, basically a set of points and a set of polygons made up of those points. What we have here is basically the state of what we're editing right now. So when we're drawing a polygon but it's not finished, it kind of lives temporarily here, and then if we're dragging a point around, it lives here. Setup just creates our window for us, and then processing framework will draw, or we'll call this draw function once per frame. So we kind of clear the screen. We have a bit of debug drawing here, which kind of draws all the points, and if they're... I'm actually going to add a flag now to disable this on or off, I think. Would be handy. Since we're now getting enough actual stuff drawn on the map that all this debug lines and stuff may not always be necessary. So, I was going to say, it's super sloppy when you press any key. Just going to toggle that. Okay. So then we have some debug drawing. I'm going to say okay, when you run a new project, you can't run your code straight. Like you can't run it straight away. Do you need to like do a build first or something? Or it's like indexing. I find IntelliJ sometimes spends ages indexing for me sometimes. So this debug drawing code is just going to draw or the city. Build is strange. Yeah, the one thing with like a lot of Java tools is that they're pretty complex in terms of how you set up the project structure within the tool, and whether you're using like Gradle or Maven and all these third-party libraries. It runs the main class all the time. So first you need a class with the public static void main in it, and then probably in project settings somewhere or other, there could be multiple classes which have that method, so there's probably something in project settings which defines what that class should be. And I guess that's called like the main class or something, or like the entry point class or something. I'm not sure where you configure that. I always get lost in the project setting menus of these things. Yes, we draw all the points. We then kind of obvious here, but we draw all of the polygons which define the regions of the city. Then here is where we call into our actual procedural generation code to turn our really simple just points and lines representation of the city into something with like buildings and roads and more details. In here is actually like drawing the region, which I want to make a separate function here. And all we're doing now is, so a region has a few components to it. So we have the main vertices which define it. Then we have like the front line of the buildings, or where the road and the buildings meet, essentially. So then everything here is road on this outside segment, and then we have this like intersection which defines like the back kind of row for the buildings, and then the buildings themselves are kind of, you know, live in this space in between. So that's kind of what we've done right now. We've also got a bit of code in the procedural generation which just populates these things with like boxes which are kind of evenly spread along the edge here. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. We dive back into that procedural generation code. Just kind of allocate a region here. We pre-calculate like where these vertices here are, based on sort of insetting them from the main polygon which they're a part of. Is insetting a word? Okay. By insetting from like the outer boundary of the region by a certain amount. So the road has a certain thickness, and then the buildings are inset by that amount plus the thickness of the buildings. Then we just sort of populate buildings, and what we're essentially doing here is about how to evenly subdivide this side of the polygon. Yeah, and that's basically all we're doing here. We're figuring out how long yeah, that's kind of what we're doing here. And then we just sort of generate the like corner points of these buildings. So the steps which we calculate are kind of like if we look here, it's the step from here like to the next point along these lines. So we just kind of step along like that, and then we just connect things up into squares. We also have a similar step for like the back row there. So here all we're doing is like calculating the corners of the building. And right now we're just generating a building which is a box. So there's two things I'd like to do now. The first one is I would really love to not have these like wedge-shaped things go into the corners, and I more want the buildings to like connect in a straight line. So I think what I'm going to do here is, rather than like connect this point to this point, I want to instead connect it to a point like here instead, so that the buildings are more like square on. And then I'm going to have something specifically to fit and like fill this corner as like a special case. So figuring out where the like corresponding line of the building should be is kind of what I want to do next, because right now it's using this whole length. I could do something fancy-ish and like project a line out and see where it hits here. You know, this is another kind of angle, so we kind of go up to there. Whereas this one would go to here. So that would be like working out where this line and this line intersect. I could do that. But I'm kind of going to cheat, I think, and just do this like a real quick and dirty way, which is figure out how long this line is, and then just take like the midpoint of this line, and then extend out by the same direction. So this won't be quite the same. But since the corner building is going to be weird shapes anyway, yeah, we could change this, but for now I think this is the quickest way to make this happen, and it'll get us 90% of the way to how it should probably actually be done. So I'm no longer going to do it this way. But instead I'm going to figure out the midpoint and then like move along half of whatever like this length was. Now I could be more fancy and consider the ratio of lengths of these. Nah, forget it. Okay, let's just do it the simple way. So basically I'm going to do all this front face stuff earlier on. Sure, I've got that copied. Oh, you know what? It's the other way around, isn't it? I should be calculating the back and then making the front sort of similar length to that. So backface vector, backface length is equal to backface vector dot magnitude, and then okay, that should give us the midpoint. Progress, good. Congratulations. I feel like sometimes you can pump out code, but how that code then looks to you in the morning is another question potentially. So Okay, so we know how long this section is. We know the midpoint here. Now what I want to do is travel from the midpoint towards this corner, like by this length here. In fact, maybe useful here. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely code I've written which I have somewhat forgotten how it works, or would. Yeah, I know that. Not that I'm drunk, it's like any code I've written a long time ago. I kind of get that. At the midpoint to face vector dot set mag times that should work, and then for the end okay, this is kind of dirty since I'm actually mutating this, which I don't like, but could be worse. Okay. So now what I need to do is not use the adjusted start vertex and the adjusted end vertex. Where's the front face length? You know what? Let's change this to okay, a bit cleaner. This is kind of getting a bit messy and redundant, which I accept, but I'm working on a limited timescale here, so there's my excuse. Okay. Cool. Will this work, or will this do something terrible? Okay. Probably missed a bracket somewhere. Where'd that go? something not great. I've probably got some crazy wild numbers or zeros or something. It's not being used. Oh. What's going on here? Okay, maybe time to throw the debugger on. We're doing something really silly. Okay. Recalculate this stuff. Probably our region contains some reasonable things here. Looks okay. I say that with a very cursory glance. It may not be okay, but this is what I've been changing. Back face length is 145. So front face start vertex, we have a front face end vertex, we have our midpoint, which is, yep, looks reasonably in between those. Should think about half step. Yep, kind of seems reasonable there. Just think at our adjusted start and end vertex, vertices. So the end vertex is like 486. Okay, so these are maybe back to front. Hey, welcome back. Oh, hang on. Am I not? That would help, wouldn't it? Okay. Ooh. That's kind of funky. So these are clearly like skewed off. So that did not. Code bodies, yeah, I guess that's just happened, right? So, okay, so what I was trying to do is previously we'd have these like, so we'd have this polygon and we'd have this inner one and we're trying to draw buildings and it would connect them up, like subdivide it like this. And I was trying to make it instead subdivide it like more in a more square way like this. So what I was trying to do was, rather than connecting like this point, you know, like this line to this line, I kind of wanted to adjust this line to be like more, you know, in line with the corresponding one here. And I've just applied some like offsets to do that, and most likely made a worrying geometrical pattern, which is entirely unintentional. So I've probably got like a, yeah, let's actually look at what's going on here. So it looks like the front edge is being offset. The start point is kind of just way wrong, off to the outside of the bounds of where it should be. Okay. Yeah, it is kind of cool, but it's also kind of wrong. Probably one of these vertices is off to the side. This is the thing, it's like really annoying to like visualize this kind of stuff. Because it's actually drawing the correct stuff, it's then drawing a load of extra crap, right? It's maybe the step which is wrong, I think. Because this looks right, this looks right, this looks right. If I make it wider, it puts more buildings in. It's just like the last one of those points gets like super, like it's hitting all the correct points, like eventually. It's just well, it's just also getting some crazy point off to the side there. Like maybe I'm like mutating something that I shouldn't be mutating. So I'm using a lot of these utility functions which take vectors and do stuff to them without changing the original vectors, and I'm mixing it with like stuff which actually changes and modifies vectors. Let me throw a debugger on here. So I need to make sure that the points it generates are all like inside the line in question. So where are we? So I'm in here and it's hard to read. So there's the original start and end. Here's the adjusted start, which is within that range. There's the adjusted end, which is also within that range. Okay. So what's going on? I wonder if as I'm not mutating anything, am I? Did not mean to click that. Good old calc here. So times. fine. That's okay. $20. Yeah, I feel like that should work. So let's see if I can eyeball this again. Okay, this is totally wrong. So this point is like out of bounds of the start and the end here. It should be less than that, and in fact it should be between 280 and 457. You can see this starts at 280. Right. Okay. Ways to be better at programming. You mean like practical tips, like for process, you mean? Practical stuff. Okay, so there's a concept I like called So there's a guy called Casey Muratori who's a proponent of this, and it's called compression-oriented programming. Or yeah, this is probably the one. Yeah, I think this is an article worth Googling and reading into. It's about the kind of mindset of programming, and there's some examples here, but the basic idea is that you start by writing things in like the super dead simple way, right? Like when I started this, I had one file, everything was just a function in here, and then when I realized I needed to do some stuff relating to geometry, I thought, okay, this is going to cause a mess, so I then created a separate place to put this. So it's kind of this idea of like repeatedly factoring things out, right? And not spending too much effort on architecting things before you actually need to. I mean, this is easier once you have like some instinct for how things can work. But the idea is to make less assumptions about how things ultimately going to fit together and how things, you know, what you'll need and how things should be organized, and instead start building things up and then start factoring things out, start reorganizing like iteratively. It's basically like iterative development, and there's a fine line between working in an iterative way and just not having a plan and kind of going by the seat of your pants, which admittedly is kind of what I do on these streams, because I just try and hack stuff together in a short time frame. So there's a balance there, but I think that's the mindset I normally bring in whatever tool or language I'm using. Is these would have just been variables, and now I'm like, okay, I need a class. Now I want multiple of these, so I need to factor it out into a class so I can have a list of them, that kind of thing. I'm sure there's loads of stuff, but I can't think off the top of my head of like tips like out of thin air. Yeah, if there's anything in particular that gives you issues or any particular area, then maybe that will inspire me to remember something. Oh, that's why I'm offsetting from the end instead of the beginning. Pretty certain that is it. Boom, there we go. Okay, let me get rid of my hackery. This is another thing I often do is, okay, if this was IntelliJ, I'd have a way nicer debugger, and I could step through and like really examine the state of things in a nice way. Like with this tool, I can't do that so much, but something I like to do is, when I couldn't figure this out, I immediately commented out this thing and simplified to the simplest case, which is like each section has only one building on it, because that then can give you some insight into where the issue is. So that's a kind of debugging technique, I think, is to remove factors one by one until the error goes away, right? That's a way to like, it's kind of like binary search, right? Or like divide and conquer in algorithms. If you can eliminate a whole section of your code or a whole possible factor which may be causing errors, then you should do that. Nice. Okay, we now have these sections looking like this, which is kind of cool. You know what? I think it may serve me just to like stretch these out to fill this space for now. So I'm going to make these evenly spread. Unit test, yeah. Creatix, welcome back. We're doing your project, which you which you voted for. You've luckily come in just after I've been banging my head against some stupid debugging thing, because this goddamn tool, the one thing I don't like about processing is it doesn't have a proper debugger. So yeah, so the point right now is I can draw these polygons. I can kind of lock that in. Oh, that's not right. Yeah, so I can place these points, I can draw these buildings, and it kind of creates what could be like a section of a city, so I can kind of connect these up. The idea is that these gaps in the middle would be roads. I can... Okay, they kind of distort when they get to larger sizes right now, but I can make these things bigger and they'll kind of scale and they'll fit in buildings kind of accordingly to that. Yeah, so I can put a big old city section here. And it gets kind of filled in. So this is based loosely on like this kind of tool for kind of randomly building and populating cities. And right now it works basically by taking these polygons, kind of insetting them to form the roads, insetting them again to form like the back row of the buildings, and then we're just kind of subdividing these lines in order to put buildings along them, essentially. And really the last step, which I want to do, is rather than these buildings just being squares, I kind of want to have arbitrarily shaped things in here. So I've already kind of defined the corner points of each building. So what I think I want to have is lots of scribbling here. So I'd like to be able to define, if we have like this row happening and there are buildings along here, they're kind of like regularly sized. I'd like to be able to define like a template for a building in this that gets distorted to like fit this space, right? So it could be like this kind of shape. Yeah, the core of it's there, like the geometry stuff. There are definitely some edge cases I still need to handle, like if these regions are like concave, then it doesn't work out quite right. Yeah, but I'd like to be able to now have a little library of like building shapes and have it then like fill in, you know, these like arbitrary shapes that I've drawn. But these buildings are going to be defined probably on like a 0 to 1, like a kind of normalized space, and then they'll just be like distorted to fit whatever shape, because they may not be exactly square when they appear in context. And I actually feel like this is going to be kind of easy to do, maybe famous last words, but let's create a little library here. So let's maybe plan out a couple of these buildings. So yeah, if we have this kind of box again. So we have the obvious one, which is just a square, and then we have a more complicated one that's maybe 0, 0, 0, 1, like 1/3, 1, inset by a third here, something like that. I'm just going to do a bit of data entry now to kind of define some of these shapes. I would probably load these from a file preferentially, but this will do for now. I don't want to bother about loading a JSON library. So let's 1 point, another point. Okay, that should form one building. This is a kind of janky way to specify them, like as a list of floats, and I did that because it's the shortest way for me to then like type in here like hard code. I'd probably have done like, you know, like a list of vectors or a list of vectors or something a bit more nice than this, because I'm going to need to do some jankiness to like pull these pairs out by their index and stuff, but I think this should be okay. Or rather, I don't care that this is actually really not okay. I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. Add one more fancy building in here. What should we go with? Maybe like an L shape. Cool. Here they go. Up to the top. That was a mess. Down, up. Ultimately, I don't want to add a mode where I can draw these, but I feel like that's kind of out of scope right now. So we have 0, 0 in the bottom corner, up there, to make it across, go down, then we're cool. I think that works for us. So what we've generated here is the corners, which is fine. So now we need to actually pick one of the templates here. Get do something fancy. Seed it with the hash code. Seems like a fun thing to do. Cool, so there's the template. Then we have the building points. And we're packing like 2 things in at a time here, so building vertex, index, so annoyingly the autocomplete doesn't, in this sort of pseudo ID, doesn't recognize this thing I've just declared here, which is annoying. actually, I could just do it like this. Step up 2 at a time. That index, and then the Y is just the following entry. Remembering we didn't. I'd have preferred to like nest these in here. If these are like JavaScript, I could have done that like super succinctly, but or even if we were loading for JSON, but yeah, that's what we're working with. So that's the X and the Y. Then what I kind of need to do is to like map or interpolate these things to match from this space, right? Where this is like 0, 1. Like this is X. This is Y. I need to interpolate it onto the actual shape of this polygon, which may be something like this, right? Or, you know, something a bit more funky even. So this would be like a bilinear interpolation. So I think I need to do this in one axis and then the other. If I know how far along. It's kind of, you can think of it, I guess, as like a weighted average of the corners. Is that true to say? Yeah, right, where the weights are kind of determined by how close they are on like either axis. Okay, how does this work? Can you do this for each axis independently? So if it's 0.5 in X, you know it's along this line. And then the amount is determined by Y. I believe that works, right? If that's 0.75, then it ends up along this line. Yes, so kind of interpolating here. So bottom left corner is this one here. So these indices, by the way, are like 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're kind of mapping between 0 and 3 based on X and 1 and 2 based on X. Okay. So that's 0, 3, 1 to 2. Okay. So the point here is equal to... Yeah, so these x and y are kind of like normalized in 0 to 1. We need to map them like onto world space if you like. Now, there's a significant chance I've already screwed something up here. We shall see if that's the case. Or maybe this just magically works. I'm not adding this. It should be. Okay, something weird. Throw a breakpoint in here. If we can figure this out. Okay, it's got those corners, which I presume are correct. It was drawing those fine before. I'm going to pick a building template. 0, 1. Okay, let's pick this kind of funky thing. Ah. There we go. Nice. So I feel like we have probably just missed a point when describing one of these shapes. Zero, 0, 1. Ah. Nice, this actually seems to be doing what we need, so I think the next step is just to maybe render these in a bit of a nicer style. So let's change how we render a region. I think what I'm going to do is fill, let's pick some reasonable color palette for this. So I want a kind of off-white. That's the baseline. I think that would be cool. Maybe a grey for the road, so they would kind of appear like a this kind of shape. And then the buildings I can do like with an outline. Kind of like this, and maybe like a pure white fill, we'll see. Yeah. We can play around with that. Let's grab some of these colors. 200, 190, 120. Stroke and fill. No longer need to draw that. Yeah, right, like the issue is like how these adapt to some of the more extreme circumstances, I think. Wait, 23. Try something like this. The overall background can be Debug Drawing. When we're drawing the polygon, we're just drawing it like that. I think instead I'm just going to use in shape. Why? Close. Does that do what I need? It's not quite what I wanted. I wanted the... Oh, I know. Okay. I'm quite happy with this. This is actually kind of doing what I expected it would do. So we've got the basics working here, right? So we've got we've connected these things up into polygons. We've created a bit of space for roads. I realized I should have colored the in a bit differently, maybe. Created a little space for these buildings to live in. We are randomly populating these from a pool of buildings. There's only 3 right now, right? We have this horseshoe one, like the L-shaped one, and the regular square. But these things are adapting as we make it smaller. We get fewer buildings fitting in there. There's still some issues, right? Like if we make this a really acute angle, then this isn't handled super well. I'd also like to put stuff in the corners. That would actually be pretty easy to do. I could probably do that right now, in fact. So maybe that's how I'll finish things off. But you know what? This is actually sort of fulfilling my my expectations for this. I wasn't super clear about ultimately what we wanted to achieve. And there are more edge cases in it now, I realized, than that I'd probably previously thought, especially in terms of how this accounts for acute angles like this. There's also, we absolutely cannot handle at all concave stuff. The reason there is just that I've not accounted properly for the direction of like the normal of these things. It's not a huge deal, like that's just a little geometry mathematical thing which we could enhance that with. There's also the way that these shapes really come to like a pointy wedge, and I think I already mentioned earlier a possible way around that, which is that right now what we're doing is, you know, we have points coming together kind of like this, and when we decide, you know, where the buildings come up to, we just like take a line sort of inwards and go along it at a certain point, which can lead to like these really like narrow wedge-shaped things. What we should probably actually do is take like maybe do the same thing, but then take like a 90-degree angle from this. If I add a layer, we kind of want to take like a 90-degree angle here and like slide it along until like this distance is sufficient, and then that will become like the end point. I think that's a way we could do that. Or else it would be to do something sort of similar, which is to take this point and draw a line like parallel to that at our desired sort of thickness, and then do the same for this other line, and to work out like where they intersect, right? Because if we have a really nice like shallow corner, then that point is going to be like relatively close. Like this distance is fairly small, but when we have a really acute corner, that distance gets like way wider, right? Like these are the same distance-ish from the edges, but this distance is really long. So we'd have to calculate our offsets from the corners differently to handle that. So I think the last thing I want to do is to put these corner buildings in. And all this is that we have a special case when we get to the end of any particular row. So it's our row, we're drawing buildings, this, and here, and here, and here. We just need to now define a building between this point, this point, this point, and this point. Which we pretty much have, right? So, or we have that information available, or recalculate it at some point. it's kind of then awkward maybe to do some like look ahead stuff here. So you kind of need to do this for the next segment, but we may not know what that is yet, so we should probably pre-calculate this stuff separately. Which means probably just moving some of this stuff. What do we ultimately need? So we need start and end, and we need the steps. We probably don't even need that. We need the start and end. So I think what I'll do can I rename this? I want to call it like an edge. Oh well, too late. One thing processing doesn't seem to let you do is rename a file. I'm not sure how that's supposed to work. So just going to basically pull this loop out, and the sort of yeah. So this is kind of turning out nicely. It's because you can just distort stuff up to a point and it kind of looks okay. As we've seen some of the more extreme edge cases, it won't really handle, but if your regions are like more or less like convex and they don't have any like too extreme angles, then I think you do quite a lot of this. I'm sure what they're doing here is they may be like internally triangulizing, like here, right? They've clearly like broken this down into other sub things, so like decomposing these is probably another step to doing this. This may even be done like recursively, right? I think that's how you get stuff packed in like that, which is something we can't quite handle right now. Yeah, so I want to kind of pre-calculate some stuff. So I can do all this. I'm going to say basically I'm using some of this stuff I calculated and I'm just saving it away. Because when I fill in the corner, I'm going to need to know about some information about my like neighboring, you know, when I'm considering this side and I want to put in this corner thing, I need to now already know about my neighbor. So some of this geometrical stuff we calculate I'll need to know that to get context. Similarly, when we're doing this edge, it needs to know about like where this point is, basically, right? So I'm just saving that away. And then all this other stuff. What do we do here? So just pull that back out. And then pretty much all of this stuff, what do we use this for? Okay, we can just now pull this out of what we've already calculated. Ah, okay. So I think right now this should be functionally equivalent to what we had. Unless I screw up and don't add this to the collection I was building up. Cool, so this is functioning as before. But this will then allow me to hopefully work out this corner information. Yeah, I may not have even needed that. Okay, yeah, no, I do. Okay. So think about the winding of these, they're kind of clockwise. So let's pull this out into a function. Right. Okay. So these are the corners we're passing in here. So now we've kind of wrapped up the code which distorts stuff to fit Just distort stuff to fit the kind of building plots, if you like. Okay. I'm going to do something kind of similar here. I want to get access to okay, then we're going to go from kind of figure this out. So we have two things meeting like this. So we have progress again. Congratulations. You have to show us the project one time. So I kind of want to draw a square here. So I'm going to go from the rear. This is going clockwise, right? So this is like section I. This is section I plus 1. So it's like the rear eye, front eye. Then it's the very corner. Then it's the front eye plus 1. Okay. So that's the end of that. So if this is like the inside of the polygon, then this is the back face, and this is like the outward facing face. And these are both the end because we're kind of going in a clockwise fashion here, so it's the end of like this block, which is section I. So we're going to draw a square from the rear end to the front end, and then to the kind of corner of the road, and then to the front start of I plus 1. Okay. Then okay. This is P2. Bring boundaries. Front start. Okay. Okay. Here's hoping I haven't screwed up something here. Something that the compiler won't catch. Well, I'll be damned. That just worked. Obviously these buildings are getting kind of really distorted here, so we could do something, right, like where you detected how distorted this shape was and use different type buildings, right? Like if it's too far off a square, then just have it as a filled block, because that would seem more natural, or have a different pool of buildings based on that. So kind of similar to the stream we did with the battlefield generator, you could have a set of constraints which determine which kind of buildings get selected to fill these slots based on whatever properties they have. Maybe that's an exercise for the reader if anyone wants to run with this. I will be posting up the code along with the VOD at some point in the next couple of days. Yeah, but I feel like we've totally got somewhere now with this. And it's kind of cool to see how these, glitchiness aside in certain edge cases, how everything kind of fits and comes together. Cool. I hope everyone likes the music, by the way. If you didn't catch me mentioning at the beginning, this was actually made on a previous stream last Friday by Paul, our musician. So this ambience is an original thing he put together live on stream. It's good, right? It's like magic to me. I don't know how people compose music. It's kind of crazy. Cool. On this, yeah. So I will definitely share the code. So if you keep an eye out, so I'll drop some links in here. So yeah, the best place is to follow us. So each point, oh, like a weight? No. What I kind of wanted to do was have something that represents like how wide the road is. So it's kind of trying to be uniform here. You could add a weighting, and one thing you could do would be to like distort these things to make the road look narrower or wider based on that, like visually. But yeah, you could also do pathfinding on this, right? That could be kind of cool. You could build a little framework for TSP or like A-star or some sort of pathfinding thing and just use this as a kind of neat way to visualize stuff. You know, having these corners really does help, like make some of the more crazy shapes look a bit more natural. Yeah, so if you check out our Twitter, I'll post on there when the VODs are up, and that would include a link to the code. Our Discord is our community for our main project, which is called Steamhounds, which is a turn-based tactical kind of grid-based game. Has very little relation to this, but the idea of like a city map is something which can come up in relation to that project. We're running a tournament tomorrow via our Discord, so if anyone's interested in taking part, you can jump into there, and slots are still very much open for that. Yeah, but aside from that, I'm kind of pleased with what we've achieved. It's still like super crazy hot in here, so I'm gonna say goodbye. Oh, awesome! Yeah, definitely check out last week's like music production stream then. Cool. So I will catch you most likely next week. Take care, everyone.